Hey everybody, it's Friday morning and I'm still feeling pretty good from last night hanging out at Beast's birthday party at iFix Arcade. We were drinking some really nice whiskey and just playing arcade games and going nuts all night. It was a lot of fun, and I really hope that anybody that passes through Brooklyn gets to attend one of these things, because it's just a bunch of people, everybody's welcome, we're all just playing video games and hanging out, and it's always good times. But anyway, I don't think I'm hungover. It was good whiskey, so usually the less impurities in the alcohol, the less chance of a hangover. But we'll see how many takes it takes me to get through the Q&As. So I'll just jump right into it. First up, in response to releasing the weekly podcast early for Patreon members, most people didn't really have an opinion either way. They said, whatever, maybe just leave it alone. I'll probably watch it Wednesdays anyway, which is the exact feedback I was looking for. And also, I realized, like last Wednesday, I didn't actually get it done editing it until after it went live. So depending on the schedule in the week, it might not even really be a bonus to anybody. So thanks very much for everybody that chimed in on that. And also about having other random streams. Most people's attitudes towards it was, just do it. And if I'm around, I'll watch. And if I'm not, maybe I'll catch it later. Which, once again, is exactly the feedback I wanted. And it's kind of the same attitude I have towards all the people I follow. Fire it up, do whatever you want, and if I'm around, I'll try to get to it live, and if not, I'll try to watch it later. So I think that's going to be my stance on all that for a while, and thanks to everybody for chiming in. Chad Kruger had a couple of questions. First, he said he had a hard time finding the converters page on my website and had to Google it. So if this happens in the future, this menu here, this floating menu, thanks to Justin for designing that in, anytime you want, you could just click on it and just search right there. It's not the best way to do it, and I know the site's not as intuitive as it could be, but at least there's a search bar. And to answer your direct question, converters was under upscalers. But the whole website needs a full overhaul. Even this page, I still have to add the RetroTink 2X to it, so I'll get there. Also, his other questions regarding TCL TVs, he ordered the 6 series and wants to know what the exact setting is to get the least lag. It might change between year models, so I would just open the Roku app, go into advanced settings, and turn everything off. And hopefully you have a way to split the signal so that you could take screen captures of both CRT and flat screen at the same time for a lag test. And the final question was about the VGA port on the old G-SCART switch revisions. So that's just a D-sub port. It's not a VGA signal. It's the same RGBS signal that's on the SCART line, just on a VGA style port. But there is one important difference in that was designed to go into devices that would really use VGA or BNC connectors, such as those cheap VGA to BNC cables for going into RGB monitors, or going VGA to VGA cable, not signal, into the Extron devices. And those output TTL level sync, so the higher voltage. And I think the mentality was SCART outputs SCART voltage and VGA port outputs VGA voltage, which certainly makes sense to me. So if you do want to use that on a SCART device, there's no cable out there that you could just buy for this. Some have issues. Some of the ones that you see on eBay were meant for specific projectors, so they're not wired for this. But you could make your own. Just buy a VGA cable, cut the end off, buy a SCART head, and wire it in. The only trick is you would have to put a resistor on the sync line inside that SCART head to drop the voltage back down. I think a 470 ohm resistor might be good enough. You might need a 660. But either way, anything around that should be okay. And I'll see if I could get around to testing that one of these days if you were serious about making your own cable for it. But I think I got all the questions. It's a Serial Wow was asking if I could recommend any kind of component video splitter for dual outputs. And at the moment, the best, cheapest ones that I know of are those Extron Crosspoint switches. And you can get 8x8, 12x12, so you could have as many outputs as you want. The downside is they're very big and clunky, whereas the G-Comp switch, even the G-SCART switches are as compact as they could safely be. So if you were really looking for one solution for as much distribution as you want, using the Extron Crosspoints might be better overall than using one of the G-Comp switches. But if you're looking for size, compact and really designed specifically for retro gaming, I would just wait for the 2x8 G-Comp switch. But I think that's months away. And while you can get component distribution amp equipment on eBay, they're often much more expensive than the Crosspoints. I've seen small, cheap 8x8 Crosspoints for like $40. So maybe the best thing for you would just be to use that instead, or use it until the new G-Comp comes out. But I hope it pointed you in the right direction. Firebrand X had a good question that I definitely don't have a solid answer for. He asked, what do people do if you strip a plastic screw hole in consoles? So, the old trick when you're putting a screw into plastic is you put it in and then you left turn until you feel like a bump. And that's kind of finding the groove to go in so that you don't strip it or recut its own groove. And as long as you use the find the thread trick, your console should be okay. But what if other people owned it before you and stripped it? I've seen a lot of NES consoles be stripped. And the truth is, when I find them stripped, I just, it's usually, I've been lucky enough that it's only 1 or 2 screws, so I just put the screws in a bag and kind of tape it to the inside or something. And I haven't really found a way to fix it. I do know on some devices that I didn't care about, not rare retro gaming equipment, just cheap junk devices. I'd put super glue inside the holes, put it together, and then screw the screw in. And it would work, but it's definitely not good for it because you're essentially just melting the plastic inside of that. And when you go to unscrew it, you could snap the stand off. So that's definitely not a good solution for good equipment. You'd mentioned the Super Graphics. Definitely don't do that for the Super Graphics. But maybe other people know what to do, because in some cases you could just use a thicker screw, but that opens up a can of worms. How thick should you go? Will it break the stand off? Maybe there's some kind of plastic Loctite solution that that would work, and it wouldn't, unlike super glue, it wouldn't be a permanent bond, it would just stick to it. But that's a great question, so if anybody knows the answer to that, please post down below. Jason D said, thank you for the audio link. What does everybody else think about that? Is just posting an MP3 right in the Patreon description good enough? If so, that's super easy. It's not elegant, but it certainly works. So please post down below, and if everybody's happy with it, I could just continue to post the MP3s right here. Connery Kateni asked, what's the best component cables for the PS2 and the best way to get the best video out of the GameCube? The PS2, definitely the HD Retrovision cables. Yes, they're my friends, but that's not why I always say that. I say that because I know the build quality and I've seen the scope captures. You could try to find the official original Sony ones, and they're excellent, but I think they're probably more expensive at this point and used and harder to find. So I would just get the HD Retrovision ones. Their store is still closed, but I think their resellers still have them in stock. So I would take a look for that. Best video out of the GameCube? I would say it's any of the upcoming tweaked GC video solutions. So as for a plug and play, the Eon one works fine. Just buy that right off of Amazon, plugs right in, you don't have to worry. There's newer firmware. I don't think you could update the firmware on the Eons. There's newer firmware that has some chroma tweaks. I believe they were chroma tweaks that help the video output to be a little bit better. So any of the newer solutions, like Dan's GC Dual, I believe would have that integrated in. I'm not sure if it is yet. You might want to contact him directly. That's Citrus 3000 PSI. If the Badass Consoles one is ever released, that one has a tweaked video output as well. And there's a whole bunch of little things that you could do. You could build your own, but essentially it's the GC video solution with the video tweaks in it. And you could choose whichever is your preferred method. I think a lot of people really like the GC Dual internal mod because you get both RGB component and HDMI out of it, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, definitely GC video, and I would go for the HD Retrovision cables. Kester Weeks had a few comments. I'll go from bottom up. He said when cleaning carts, he uses a microfiber cloth and uses damp water to clean them. And the only problem with that is there's microscopic little bits in non-distilled water, in regular tap water or anything like that. So when you're scrubbing, you might actually be grinding in little microscopic things into it. And I'll show I'll see if I could put a video in here that shows zooming in with the microscope to show these things. And I'll definitely, whenever I get around to it, show very good microscopic zoom-ins that show what happens when you do that. So I think the microfiber cloth is a good idea. I would just use isopropyl and scrub away. But just don't forget the pencil eraser, because that one, that does a really, really great job, the pink pencil eraser. So I would use a microfiber cloth and IPA to clean off all the topical gunk, then scrub it with a pink eraser, and then microfiber and IPA again to get all the little bits of rubber off of it. He also mentioned that he was looking to get a TCL TV, and the salesman told him that it's possible to enter the BIOS menu to disable the anti-aliasing. I don't know if he got that right, but either way, if you go into any of the advanced settings menu in the apps, you could disable any of the extra features they stack on. But if you find a way to go into a menu without using a Roku app to do it, I'm all ears, so please let me know. And also, he commented about Patreons and his thoughts on that. So thank you very much for the support. I really do appreciate it. Next, Scralings asked, does Kevtris have a Patreon? His contributions to the community are immeasurable. Yeah, I agree 100%. And if he had a Patreon, I would certainly subscribe to it. I would subscribe to that and buy the products from that he makes from Analog. I have no problem doing both. But no. You know, I don't want to get into Kevin's business, but I just believe that he builds those products for Analog, and that's his only plan for that for the short term. But next time I talk to him, I'll ask him about that, because I think he'd. I don't think he'd do it, but I think a lot of people would love to contribute to his projects. Santiago Sanchez has a question about SNES models, and I partially blame myself for his question because I could be a lot clearer about these things, and I'm going to try to. But he said that he noticed on some boards, meaning message boards, that people call the first models 3-chip, referring to all pre-1-chip models. But he noticed that when people talk about the 1-chip 03s, that could get confusing. So the things that you need to... The only term that you really need to understand is that when we reference the term 1-chip, it doesn't matter if it's 1-chip -01, -02, or -03. The 1-chip means that all of the video chips are combined into one, and then that is used on those 3 different model, the fat SNESes, as well as the Mini. So those 3 in the Mini, when you RGB bypass them with a THS amp like Voltars or Bordes, they all look identical. You know, there's other factors, you know, make sure the caps are fixed, you know, make sure it's in good shape and all that stuff. But those are one separate group, and they're all as sharp as you can get with an original console. And then everything else is just the original design. So that has the original chips separated out. Some of them even have a different board for audio. And I don't know, I think there are actually 3 different chips that were combined into one. So when people talk about 2-chip or 3-chip, they're referring to the older ones. And I don't know of a great name, so I've just been referring to them now as original SNESes. But those are the only things to remember. All models, all motherboard revisions, all regions, original SNES output, not as good quality. Some better than others, but still not perfect. Whereas all of the 1-chips, so the SNES Mini, the 1-chip -01, 1-chip -02, and 1-chip -03, all output as sharp video as possible. And with a few minor things, you could, in my opinion, get it so good that it's probably most people's favorite console to choose. So I hope that cleared it up. Tomek said he's going to be in New York in a few days, and he'd like to know which places related to retro gaming that I recommend seeing. If you have like a day to spend, I would recommend starting at the Nintendo store in Rockefeller Center, because it's just neat. And then walking down to J&L Video Games, which is a relatively short walk. And they got some cool stuff. It's very expensive, Manhattan priced, but whatever. Then I would recommend, depending on how much time you have, you could jump on a train and go to the first Barcade off at 23rd, which is fun. You know, it's think of it as like a toy. None of the arcade machines are in great condition, but there's a huge variety. You could have a drink and some food. Then I would go to Video Games New York, which has a bunch of really rare and cool stuff. Once again, Manhattan pricing, though. And then right a few blocks from there is another Barcade, so you could check that one out as well. And then from there, I would go all the way to Brooklyn Video Games, because that's a store where the prices are awesome and they have a bunch of cool stuff. It's the only game store I've ever been to that had an RGB setup right there. They sell RGB cables and HD Retrovision cables and stuff, so I would absolutely go down there and check that place out if you were looking to really buy something. And then I would end at iFix Machine Arcade, which is backtracking a little bit back towards Manhattan now. And that place, just $10 for all you could play, and you could play all of their arcade games, any of the computer games with arcade sticks. It's a good time. And depending on what days you go there, sometimes it's not that many people, so you kind of have your choice of whatever you want to do, which is fun if you want to try out every single game. But when it's packed in there, it's great because everybody's just on the same page. It doesn't matter who you are, as long as you're a game nerd, you're just part of the group. Just get to walk in, hang out, and do your thing. But if you had limited time, and if I've missed anything, by the way, guys, please post down below. But if you had limited time, I would go to Brooklyn Video Games and iFix Arcade, because you'll see barcades around the country and the world. You'll see Nintendo's got other stores, and you'll see other rare video games other places. It's not common around the New York area that you can get to a game store that's fairly priced. Digital Press Video Games in Jersey, which is a drive, not really a train ride away, they're great too if you have a car. And just iFix Arcade is, you're not going to get many places like that around where they really strive for the best RGB quality you can get. But yeah, good luck on your trip, and hit me up when you're around. Actually, depending on, you said 4 days ago, and you're going to be there in a few days. If you're around this weekend, try to swing by the Long Island Expo, or just hit me up on Patreon. If I'm around, I'll definitely go out and grab a beer with you or something. I get a lot of messages from people that want to do that, but I really do work a lot, so it's hard for me to just stop what I'm doing and go out. But if I'm already out, especially if I'm already at iFix, definitely let me know, because I always love meeting people. Mike W. had a question about voltage for power supplies and retro consoles, and I'm going to try to oversimplify this because I don't want to talk for 20 minutes about DC voltages and stuff. But he said the original SNES adapter he had reads DC 10 volts on the back, and some of the aftermarket ones, even some of the ones that we've called the really good ones, say 9 volts on it. What's the deal with that? Well, there's a few factors involved. First is that a lot of these devices can take a variance of voltages. So consumer devices, it's usually a smaller range. So, 7, 8, 9 volts, 10 volts, whatever, it's, probably going to be okay. Some of the medical grade devices, like the ones we used to make, that could actually accept between 12 and 28 volts and run fine on it. That's still kind of mind-blowing to me, by the way. So there is a bit of a variance that you could use, but the more important part is the power supplies that we've been recommending that Steve from HD Retrovision found are using newer technology, and they're much more efficient and accurate overall. So once again, oversimplifying, but that older SNES adapter might have failing components in it. At the very least, the capacitor might be failing. The voltage might not be 10, and in fact, it might kind of be swinging a little bit if you put it on a really good multimeter or a scope. Whereas if you get a brand new 9 volt, it's most likely going to be just a solid, good 9 volt signal and within the tolerance that the console can handle. So without trying to get too nerdy and probably even making a mistake, it's because the SNES can handle 9 volts, and using the newer, more efficient power supply would probably be a good idea, maybe a better idea anyway, rather than an aging power supply. But I've seen people do both. I've seen people take apart their SNES adapters, make sure all the components are good in it, and I've just been using the newer ones, and for every test I've done, I haven't seen an issue. So it should definitely be safe as long as it's the ones linked to the HD Retrovision page. I don't know if I don't know of the other one that you bought, but hopefully it could be, hopefully it'll be just as good. Tofu Man was asking about the article that Retro Access posted about their coax cables. And I gotta be honest, this is like the 4th take I've done of this, and the first 3 I rambled on for like 5 minutes about shielding. So I think I'm just gonna keep this one short to spare everybody from sitting through that. Their article is 100% technically accurate. Everything in there is right. It's just a matter of will you see the differences in the real world. When plugging a cable directly from console to OSSC into a very nice high-end capture card, I did not see a difference when using C-Sync as sync. I did not see a video difference from the Retro Access basic cables without individual shielding and their coax. But that's not the point of coax. In that situation, both should perform flawlessly. The point of coax is when you think there's going to be interference inside or out. So if you're using composite video as sync, then that immediately could give interference to all of the different lines that are running alongside of it. If your audio is notoriously noisy from certain consoles, just having the video lines run alongside it could add a buzz, especially when there's white screens and stuff. And then, of course, on the outside, if you have a whole bunch of consoles, and especially if you have more than one powered on at the same time, you have a whole bunch of wires run across something, anything could be interference in the analog world, anything. So the more shielding, the better, theoretically. It's just, will you see a difference in your setup in either the audio or video? So there's nothing wrong with the article they posted. It's technically accurate. I just don't know if in the real world their fully shielded cables will or will not be a difference over the rest. But they're awesome. So they're certainly, like, I guess the end result of my question is the end answer is that the article is technically accurate and they're amazing cables, but other people have great cables too. So I hope that was good enough, and I hope that wasn't too rambly. It was at least a third shorter than the other takes I did of this one. I'm sorry, I know I'm going to mess this one up. Per Strindeval? Please correct me next week. I really hate getting people's names wrong. The question was about optical drive emulators, GameCubes, and region outputting. And I'll skip to the end and say I don't know the answer, but I have a few points. First, a lot of people said that they were going to make optical drive emulators for the GameCube. They were in production for a while. People stopped making them, and I don't know of anybody that's picked up the slack and been making them. If you were only worried about GameCube, I would actually just use a Wii, because it's way easier to mod and you can get all the different outputs. But you specifically mentioned Game Boy, so I assume you want to use the Game Boy interface and Game Boy player. And I don't really know, or really even remember, how it worked with NTSC versus PAL. Because I do distinctly remember using the digital output and official GameCube component cables into my PVM, and it said NTSC and PAL on the on-screen display. So I was able to use Swiss, I think, to force modes. It was a few years ago, so I can't quite remember. So my recommendation to you would be to pick up one of those Action Replay discs, which when they're in production, they're fairly cheap. And it comes with a memory card reader that has an SD converter and a boot disk. And I would just give it a shot. I would, on that SD card, put Swiss and the Game Boy interface software. And I would, you could have it auto boot to Swiss. And then I would have that, let Swiss do the talking. So load whatever game, whether it's the actual real disc or whether it's a ROM, have Swiss force whatever output you want and see if that works for you. So it's not quite an optical drive emulator, but it's something you can get today. And you know, please post your results. And of course, anybody else that happens to know the answer, please post in the Patreon comments. And I will also leave a link for my page on the Game Boy interface and how to make the Action Replay discs. So that way, hopefully that would be a help. But or not make the Action Replay discs, make the SD card format for it. So I'm sorry I couldn't answer it definitively, but hopefully I was able to point you in the right direction. And I'm very sorry that I'm sure I didn't get your name right, but please correct me. Tofu Man had a couple more questions. First, do you mind if we give our input here by trying to answer a few questions before you make your own Q&A video? No, I love it. The comments in all these videos are great. It's really helpful. I've learned a lot from some of them. So yeah, fire away. I'd like to see the interaction. And similar to that, will I be allowing visitor interaction on the news articles on the website? No, comments are stupid. No, I'm kidding. Yes, because I do like the interaction, and as much as I do complain about the toxicity of things, the truth is that 75% of comments are useless but not harmful, right? Just like, hey, cool, I like this too, this sucks, whatever. This is not good or bad, it's just a comment. A lot, I would say like 20% are really great, helpful, informative comments that I enjoy reading. And I really think it's just a small percentage of things that gets toxic. It's just usually the snowball effect, because then that one comment gets a response, which gets another response, and then people get pissed, and now it's a thread that's just a whole bunch of shittiness. So I do want to open that up, but it has to be at a point where I have time to worry about that stuff. So when I'm caught up with getting all the pages back, somewhat up to date, when I have a bunch of people contributing news articles and we could all kind of monitor our own posts and stuff, then yeah, I would love that, because then that makes sense and there's a lot of time to interact and do that stuff. But at the moment, I'm waking up every morning running as, metaphorically sprinting as fast as I can until I have to stop for the end of the day. So there's no time for it. But it sucks, because a lot of these things, and even on a lot of my videos, the corrections people give me, I love that, because a lot of times I don't even know that I've made the mistake. Even things that I know the actual answer to, but when it falls out of my face, it comes out wrong. I like when people correct me, so I hope it's something I can get to relatively soon, and I think it's a great idea. But I just, I gotta wait for everything else to catch up before that. But just to remind you again, yeah, fire away in these comments. I really like interacting with everybody, and I wish I had more time to jump on and respond directly to the comments. I haven't been keeping up on that because I do the weekly Q&As, so I figure I'll definitely get to it before the end of the week anyway, but I like to try to jump on when I have time. Adam Brady has a great question that there's no way I'm going to be able to answer, but maybe I'll be able to give my opinions and possibly point you in the right direction. But he lives in the UK and has an HD TV with a SCART input that I would assume accepts at least composite video in RGB, but I guess he said it accepts S-video as well. And when he plugs in an S-video cable via a pass-through converter, so you basically just plug left-to-right audio in S-video and it comes out the SCART pins, he said he gets black and white. So I'm not really sure how to approach this. I've seen some not accept S-video over SCART, some TVs, and you're essentially they're reading it as composite video and you're not getting any of the color information, only the luminance information, which is why it would be in black and white. But I've also seen things where, and this is where I'm guessing now, because this is the end of my SCART knowledge. I believe certain pins require certain voltage in order to tell the TV to change modes, which is why if you don't have certain, I think there's a resistor between two pins on the RGB SCART cables, and those things are put into place to tell the TV what mode to switch into. And certain TVs might be different, certain adapters might have different pins in there. But my opinion on this, and this is just like a straightforward opinion. This is not, I'm trying not to sound like I'm talking down or condescending or anything, but at the end of the day, I personally have very little hours to mess with extra stuff like this. And if it were me, I would spend the time working on an RGB solution and just forgetting about S-video. So like I said, I don't mean that, I'm not like chastising you for trying to use S-video. I get it. You want a quick and easy solution before you do the full RGB mod. You want better than composite. I 100% get it. But since and I would have done the same thing you did, but since you've run into these issues, the time you're going to spend troubleshooting, messing with stuff, taking the cables apart, the time you've already spent, you could have been modding your N64. So I would, when it comes to putting this much effort into it, unless it's a fun passion project for you that you just enjoy the nerdy side, like I often do, I would just forget about it and just work on getting a direct RGB output from the N64, which I imagine your TV might read that perfectly. But if this is a fun passion project for you, I would look into voltages, and I would try to post on forums that are UK-centric where people have run into this stuff before. Video Game Perfection has a forum now. Matt might be able to help out. Rob from Retro Gaming Cables I mean, you said right there, they're a small company. He definitely wouldn't have the time to figure that out. He's swamped just trying to get his cable orders up. So I'm very sorry that I don't have a good answer for you. And I'm also sorry for saying, don't bother with that, just go with RGB. I don't mean it like that. I just mean it like, unless this is a fun project for you, I would spend your time and effort on something that's going to be an overall better solution. So sorry, hopefully the answer wasn't too shitty. And lastly, Jeremy Hopkins was asking about that TV1 downscaler, and I still haven't gotten back to trying it yet. I do plan on it. It's going to be something that I'm kind of interested in, but it's lower on my priority list than a bunch of other stuff. So I don't have an opinion on it yet, other than the one that I had was giving me a lot of trouble, which was probably just the one that I had. The only thing I could say is that a lot of these things have a frame buffer in order to make this happen, so you might want to expect a frame of lag with any of it. But I'll do the testing as soon as I get around to it, and hopefully I'll have more info. And if you're into tinkering, they're not too expensive yet, so maybe just pick one up and mess with it and see what you find. And if you get a chance to do a lag test, I'd love to see that as well. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks to everybody for participating, and I hope my answers were decent enough. And as always, please post your questions, comments, or whatever else for next week in the Patreon page below. As always, thank you so much for your support, because I really couldn't do it without you guys, and I'll see you next week.